Hello, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I'm Tina. Today I'm doing a book review of The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. This is a book that came out from Saga Press. It's this historical fiction horror. It released in March of 2025, so it's been out for a couple months. I am here to tell you, is this book worth the hype? The cover totally is. I could stare at that cover all day despite how uneasy it makes me. It's just such a beautifully done cover. I love it. I listened to this book on Audible, which is why it took me so long to get to it. The narration was superb. There's 3 narrators, all of whom did a great job. If you're new to audiobooks, this is actually a really great one to try it out on because it's just really well done, and it's always fun to have like multicast. So, an impressively researched and surprisingly unique take on vampire lore, The Buffalo Hunter Hunter is classic Stephen Graham Jones from all sides. What is it about? A diary written in 1912 by a Lutheran pastor is discovered within a wall. What it unveils is a slow massacre, a chain of events that go back to 217 Blackfeet dead in the snow. It's told in transcribed interviews by a Blackfeet named Goodstaff who shares the narrative of this peculiar life over a series of confessional visits. That doesn't tell you a lot, but there's actually 3 levels to the story that I'm going to get into. Now, when I said earlier that this is classic Stephen Graham Jones, I mean this in 3 ways. 1, it's bloody. 2, it features Indigenous representation. In this case, this is the main focus of the story. And 2, it's literary in style. If you haven't read any Stephen Graham Jones yet, I recommend that you do. I suggest that this is actually a pretty good one to start with. It's not as artsy as some of his other stuff, but it does retain his deeply affecting style without getting too literary. Though it is a literary book, it's not intended to be easily digestible. It seems to be his goal or mission to include Indigenous peoples in horror, to show they have a place in horror, of which I totally agree. And while some of his books point to how bigotry, racism, and colonization have affected Indigenous peoples, they also aren't preachy about it. It's a great balance. Of course, given this one is a historical fiction, these things are at the forefront of this story. So be prepared for some pretty horrific stuff because it's based on true stuff and it's really, really sad. All of that aside, from a story perspective only, this book has a really cool structure. It's a frame narrative, so one of those story within a story within a story novels, like Frankenstein. So we have the person in the present who is talking about reading the diary, when it's discovered, the diary itself, and then the events told to the person writing the diary, of which we have to assume he paraphrased in the diary. So you have the real time, you have 2 real times, and then one kind of found document. And what we have contained within these 3 is a vampire story, one with a really cool lore to it. Vampires are, let's just admit this, an overdone monster. There are so many vampire stories, Dracula, Nosferatu, Hotel Transylvania, Count Chocula, space vampires. This other space vampires book that just came out, it's really funny if you like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. 30 Days of Night, Fright Night, all of the romance novels about vampires, Twilight, of which I can proudly say I've never read or watched the movies. Marceline from Adventure Time, Lost Boys, Underworld. Okay, I'm going to stop. Of all of these iterations and more, I honestly don't think I've come across one with lore like this one. And that is saying something. I'm not going to spoil it. It is super cool. Moving on, the setting is of course harrowing given the time period. The bulk of the story is set in the early 1800s, the peak of when America was claiming the lands of Indigenous people and attempting genocide. So, as I mentioned, that is featured in the novel. The historical events that occur in the book, the Puguni people starving due to the buffalo extinction and the Marias massacre, were real things, and that's where the revenge enters the story. The historical detail into not only Goodstaff's life, within his tribe and in the wilderness in the 1800s, but also how Arthur's town functioned in the early 1900s was incredibly detailed and well-researched. You could picture everything so clearly. Even if you took the vampire aspect out of it, this would be a really great historical fiction. The characters are well done. You feel Goodstaff's despair, his wrestling with his curse, and his sorrow for his people. He's not exactly a happy fellow, but he is very compelling. Arthur Bucharn, as kind of the foil to him, is a fascinating character because you could tell he didn't see himself as a bad guy. And at times you can almost understand that. There are things about him that, before he kind of starts unveiling his history, are relatable, like his love of food. He felt human, incredibly flawed, yes, but he also was a product of his time as well as making his own terrible choices. He, I would argue, was almost the most interesting character in a way because he tries so hard to hide his darkness from himself. And he's not painted as a protagonist. He's clearly the antagonist. It just takes us a while to kind of get to that point. We're kind of aware of that going in, that, he's done something. You can kind of guess what that something entails, given the fact that Goodstab shows up, but you're not sure. And you hope almost the whole time that, maybe he wasn't as involved as, we assume he is going to be. I won't tell you what happens, but yeah, so he was a really, really well-drawn character. Etsy, who kind of is the main frame of the story, she's the researcher who is related to Arthur and who is kind of uncovering this diary, was the easiest character to like because she's from today and she's a self-deprecating, funny person who also is way over her head and bravely trying to understand, and when she does understand, to do the right thing. Her sections are the most enjoyable, but that's also because you aren't too worried about having to witness a massacre or other horrendous acts humans do to humans. So her sections were a bit of almost like a relief at times because you were like, okay, I can like breathe a bit easier now. And that's what's so well done about this being a vampire novel. The idea of a vampire in general is someone who lives off the blood, the death even of others. And of course, the original vampire in the story, who you meet early on, I'm not spoiling anything, the Catman, is European. I would argue that this is not an attempt as a way to harken back to original lore or kind of like a nod to like Bram Stoker or somebody. It's actually a indirect way of saying that the real vampire of the indigenous lands is the settlers, that they are a monstrous force that cannot never be satisfied. And not even Europeans generally, but just the colonialist mindset. Whichever people in the world are trying to take over other people, they are a lich who not only kills but infects. Was that a bit heavy-handed? I don't think so, but I think it was very effective. I think the only monster that would really make sense in this sort of setting and in this kind of story of an indigenous person getting revenge for his people would be to make the monster a vampire, because a vampire is a very subtle monster that can also be, very aggressive when it wants to be. And I just think that was a really, really smart choice. Now, I will say I've been talking about how great this book is. It's not perfect. It drags a little bit at times. Goodstab's story is immensely interesting when it is interesting, but there are times when it gets a little bit tedious. He does a lot of, walking in the woods, and he does a lot of lamenting. And, I get it. I get why. But I also could have had a bit less of that, personally. Likewise, Goodstab and Arthur's conversations get repetitive to a point that they could have been trimmed back a bit. And you also might need a bit of a glossary at times when you're reading this, because there are a lot of words that either aren't explained or translated only once. So you really kind of need the context. So you kind of sometimes have to pause and be like, wait, what did he say? I think this added to the realism of the story. I would never say don't do it. I also really like when books include languages from the cultures of the people in the book. It was just really hard on the audiobook because sometimes he would say something and then I'd be like, what does that word mean? But because I was on the audiobook, I couldn't just jump back 2 sentences, because normally, actually, I listened to this a lot while I was painting my house. I couldn't just set down my paintbrush or my roller and go and get my phone and jump back 30 seconds. So I just kind of was like, I'm just going to roll with it. Tied to this, Stephen Graham Jones does not hold your hand. His writing style, I would argue, is elegant, but it's also a bit aloof. It's literary, it's deeply intelligent, and it's not intended to make the journey easy for you. If you're looking for a simple historical fiction vampire story, horror story, this is not that. But if you want something meditative, thematically complex, and bloody, you should check it out. It's really, really good. It's not my favorite Stephen Graham Jones. That would probably be Mapping the Interior, but it's an excellent novel, and I think it's just really, really fascinating and just really well done. So hopefully that inspires you to read it, or maybe scares you away. So yeah, thanks for checking out my review, and